exciting, interesting to listen to, right?
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so I'm glad to speak to you, brother.
Glad to speak
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah. By the way, I was a little bit tired this morning. I'm like, what the hell? Why am I feeling so tired? And then I was like, let's just do a weather check. And it
Hmm.
was like, and your temp right now in Melbourne, it's like in Fahrenheit, it's about 89.
Oh, wow. A little hot
So
out
I
there,
was
huh?
like,
A little warm?
let's hit this air conditioner, chill it down a bit.
Right on.
What I was thinking for the interview is
Hmm.
that we'll just do a quick intro to you and to NLP.
Okay.
I want to look at it in terms of influence and persuasion context. We quickly define a frame because for me, two things are more important than anything when it comes to influence and persuasion.
Hmm.
You know better than I do. This is just my preconceived ideas.
Hmm.
One is that certainty is the magic bullet, right? I think of Tony Robbins. He'll persuade you even when he's wrong, just because he's so damn certain.
Exactly.
Right? And the other thing is frame control. He who controls the frame controls the game,
Hmm.
and I think that's something important that we should look at. If you own the frame, David, you will lead me, and
Hmm.
it doesn't matter to do what. You can get me to do anything if you own that frame,
Hmm.
right? So I think that's important. We look at that, and then we just go into some typical practical applications. Some of the things that you've spoken about, getting someone to hire you in a job interview,
Hmm.
winning in a negotiation, in a romantic context, I guess, going on a date with you.
Hmm.
I'm curious about, I don't know if it's something you have spoken about, but you're obviously very good at, right? Public speaking,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
A lot of that just comes with experience. You know, you
Well, I
get
have whole
warmed.
classes I teach on how to use this stuff for public speaking, and we go deeper into the mechanics of NLP and its uses for public speaking, probably than any other trainer I've seen out there. Um, even Richard, when he teaches his charisma enhancement, he spends a lot of time on a lot of nonverbal things, things that people don't think about. But there's another side to it, and that's the content side. When you start to create content in a public speaking venue, you have to engineer it in a certain way. And there are people out there who are using NLP beyond the master level, who will never tell you they're using it on audiences and things like that. And so what we do is in our public speaking trainings, we actually deconstruct what they're doing, the things they don't want
Nice.
you to know about. Because we call it in the module we call it ninja stories, and it's
Yeah.
all the different evil, nasty, really useful things that are fun. And if they're used ethically, they work well. But even if they're used unethically, they work well. So you got to be on your guard about it. But yeah,
That's the, that's the thing. I mean, like,
hmm
it's funny you mentioned ethically because it's like a science or like a martial art. You can just
hmm
use it either way, right? It's
absolutely.
like the internet. You use it for whatever you want,
It's a form of
right?
power, and the thing we need to understand about power is that it's a tool. It's an ability
Yeah.
to do something, and whether it's good or evil is defined by who's using it and for what objective, and what the
Yeah.
result they produce with it is. And that's really the only way you can judge it. Anybody who judges it other than by what it produces and by its, even in spite of its intention, you have to you look at the results that that particular approach or that particular application produces, and then decide if it's useful or not. Any distinctions beyond that are really just ethical people's opinions and ideas.
One question before we begin, and
Hmm.
this is a funny one. I just want to know when you know a lot about when you become a subject matter expert on anything,
Hmm.
and someone asks you a generic basic question, it can be very difficult to answer because you're like, where the hell do I even begin? Do you get that a lot? Where someone asks you a question, you're like,
Oh
oh my
yeah.
God, like where do I even
Yeah,
start, man?
you can. Well, because people are always looking for definitives. It's either this or it's that. And what the thing that you need to understand is that when we're dealing with human communication, there is no such thing as this or that. It's all based on what you mentioned at the beginning, before we began the interview, whatever, frame control and your point of view. And if you understand meaning and context and perspective, then there is no black or white. There's very few things that are definitively black and white.
Yeah,
Because as long as the context can be shifted, then a good thing can become a bad thing, and vice versa.
I love it.
Yeah.
This is going to be good, brother.
Yeah.
I'm going to start recording. I'm going to give you the fact this interview will probably go on iTunes maybe mid-February. I'll let you know when. At
Okay.
that stage, I'll give you a pre-recorded intro as well. But if you just want to give us a quick intro to yourself now, David, yourself and your background, just in a minute or so, will be
Well,
fine.
how far back in history do you want me to go? I could put on my Doctor Who trench coat and scarf, and we can talk about the TARDIS days. But well, first of all, I've been studying this stuff since the early '90s. I started with, like most people, with the first book I ever read was Unlimited Power by Tony Robbins, but I'd already had a deep interest in hypnosis and other forms of mental abilities in parallel to my martial arts. I started studying hypnosis when I was in my early 20s. I went from there quickly through NLP. I went through the speed seduction phase, which I think was an important phase for me because it taught me a lot of things not to do in terms of how to approach these things. But it also gave me a very strong background in understanding how language and the mind interact. Of course, I got certified in NLP in the early 90s, and then went off into the wilderness to kind of ply my trade on my own. So since then, when I really started to get on the map, I guess, is in 2005. I was voted one of the top 10 attraction experts of the year by seductionlayer.com and Art of Approaching. From there, I went on to create a group, or to work with a group called the Somnambulistic Sleepwalkers, which was the world's largest free NLP and hypnosis practice group all over the world. We had groups in, I think, 13 states and 5 countries, including Melbourne and Sydney. And I think we also had one in Ireland, UK, Israel. Those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. But our whole mission was just to get together on a monthly or weekly basis and drill. And if you had something, we would put it out on the table. No application was off the table, off limits. If it was something to do with the mind, if it was something to do with how to increase your influence or improve yourself, we were all about it. We didn't care if you had 20 years experience or 20 minutes. All we cared about is that you had a good attitude, a sincere desire to roll up your sleeves, do the drills, and get the skills. And it was a wonderful, amazing time. From that, several things came out. Of course, NLP Power came from a derivative of that. But another thing that a lot of people don't realize is that the entire HypnoThoughts convention, the world's largest hypnosis convention, I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. It's in the United States in Las Vegas every August, and the people that started Sleepwalkers in LA with me are the founders of that convention. It's the world's largest hypnosis convention, and it's just a great time. Well, we can talk about that a little bit later, but you just want my background, so let me just give you, every time I try to give a brief overview of my curriculum, it sounds like I'm either bragging or trying to compensate for something. I'll let you figure out which is which, but I'm a certified trainer and master practitioner in neurolinguistic programming under the founder, Dr. Richard Bandler. I've authored over 15 different products on various forms of human influence, from healing through attraction and sexuality and all points in between. I'm a certified, a licensed acupuncturist, and I have a master's degree in Oriental medicine. I'm working on my doctorate right now in Oriental medicine at Pacific College of Oriental Medicine. I'm a certified Reiki master teacher, pranic healer, pranic psychotherapist, DNA theta healer. I study Huna, Kabbalah. I am certified in the Bankston Energy Healing Method, as well as holographic memory resolution, which is an amazing system. I highly recommend anybody who's interested in the healing applications of these things jump into that. In addition to that, parallel to that is my martial arts studies. I have a 9th degree black belt in the Okinawan martial arts. I am a certified instructor in combat systema. I have a 1st degree black belt in Fanku-Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, a 2nd degree black belt in Kosho Kempo-Ryu. I'm certified basic instructor in Modernese, certified instructor in Cinco Mano Eskrima, but I don't do Windows. So, is that enough?
It's enough. I love it. I love it. A lot of exciting stuff we're going to go into today. Let's look at NLP. I like to always begin with the definition of terms.
Sure.
For those not familiar with neurolinguistic programming, what is it?
Neurolinguistic programming, if you were to ask Richard Bandler, he might give you 2 different definitions. The first one is a little bit multisyllabic in that it's the study of the structure of subjective human experience. In other words, it's the study of how human beings create meaning in their own minds and in their own neurologies, and how they use that to navigate the universe inside of themselves and outside. Okay. If you were to ask Richard now, I think the last time I heard him talk about the definition of NLP was he said he was quoted as saying it's the study of superior thinking. So it's gotten extremely simplified over the years, but really, if you want to look at what NLP is about, it's about how human beings create their map of the world, both internally and externally, how they relate to it, how it controls and dominates their way of expressing themselves, and how that language is expressed, or how that map is expressed through their spoken language, and how it can be influenced through spoken language. So language is the medium by which all of our internal experiences are transmitted, and by the way other people transmit their internal experience to us, if we understand how that language kind of knits and sews those things together, we can use our language to create powerful change and understand people by how they use their language.
There's an almost infinite number of applications for NLP. For this interview, I want to look at specifically influence and persuasion, the practical techniques themselves, staying away from the theory. And I think that first of all, the first thing you need with anyone is rapport. If you don't have rapport, people won't listen to you. You won't influence or persuade them. You certainly won't lead them. How would you go about using NLP to build rapport with someone?
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to give you a little bit of a distinction there. One of the biggest challenges that we have in rapport is that there's something that has to come first before rapport, believe it or not. And it's something that a lot of trainers and a lot of people in the NLP world, they talk about it for like a half a second or 30 seconds, and then they get right into the rapport stuff. There's something that is primary to rapport, and that thing is called state control. State control in the world, according to David, is the ability to enter or exit or link together within yourself any sequence of psycho-emotional states at will, on demand. Now, the reason for that is that if you learn the techniques, the rapport techniques that NLP has to teach you, but you do not have control of your state, you are going to be at the mercy of whatever rapport that you get. So if you've ever gotten rapport with somebody who's in a bad mood, did you suddenly feel all energetic and sprightly? No.
You did not. You did not.
Right? Or get somebody in rapport with somebody who's got a cold, or God forbid, on their period. Right? And so one of the things that we need to understand is that as a human being, our spoken language is tertiary to everything else. What we do with our bodies, the feeling states we have in our bodies, dictates so much of our effectiveness with NLP. We get focused on languaging and we get focused on the rapport, and that's good, that's fine. But we need to understand the primacy of our psycho-emotional states. If we are not in the right states, it does not matter how much NLP you know. You will not be able to get rapport. Okay? To get rapport with people, many times you must affect the psycho-emotional state that they're in. You have to match their psycho-emotional state. Now, NLP will give you mechanical techniques for doing that. Okay? Matching their breathing patterns, matching their blink rate, the verbs they use, or the tonalities that they use, the postures that they use. Anytime you can take your physiology and make it match or reflect the person you're seeking to get rapport with, the two of you will, like two Bluetooth syncing up. If you've ever gone to YouTube and watched those metronome videos where you have 40 different metronomes all on a table and they're all moving at different rates, well, after about 2.5 minutes, they start doing this.
Slowing down.
Well, they don't just slow down, they synchronize. Now, human beings are affected by that same physics-based phenomena as well. Rapport is actually something that can't not happen. It's just that the techniques of NLP can allow you to kind of facilitate or get that frequency faster. Okay? You are already walking around in the world's most powerful rhythmic source a human being can have. It's called the human heart, that radiates a measurable electromagnetic field 8 feet in diameter from your body. We can measure that with instruments. Now, those two fields, when you get within 8 feet of another human being, those fields at 16 feet from each other can start to synchronize. Actually, they can start to synchronize a lot sooner. So rapport is something that can't not happen as long as you have proximity. But if you understand how to become as much like the person that you're seeking to influence, you can accelerate that process. And there's a sensation that comes along with that when your neurology synchronizes with another human being's. And that's something that in our trainings, we spend a lot of time teaching people how to kind of zero in on, to calibrate kinesthetically before trying to calibrate visually. Because what classical NLP is going to teach you how to do is they're going to ask you to take on as many of the characteristics of the person that you're seeking to influence as possible, to mimic them, for lack of a better word. And then every now and then just make a different movement or change something and see if they follow you. They call that pacing and leading. Pacing means to become like something in this context. And we're going to talk about, since this is an influence podcast, then we have to look at pacing from two places. And the first definition is exactly what we're talking about: to become as much like someone or something as possible. That is the key to rapport.
I want to go back a step. You've mentioned the term psycho-emotional a few times. Does that just mean mental, emotional? You need to.
No.
What does that mean?
Psycho-emotional state is a combination of what you're doing emotionally, the physical states of your and the postures and the breathing that you have, as well as your cognitive processes. So when we talk about psycho-emotional, remember the functionally what you need to understand is that every time a human being goes through an emotional shift, there is a corresponding body sensation and a body location. So you can't divorce the body from your emotions. It's too integrated, okay? However, when that happens, when you go through an emotional state shift, the perceptual filters, the filters that govern what you cognitively pay attention to and what kinds of information have more relevance to you, change automatically. So if I walk into a room, and let's say there are 10 units of information in the room that I could pay attention to. If I walk into that room in a negative state, and 8 of those pieces of data are positive and 2 of them are negative, guess what I'll focus on first? Right? Exactly. I'll focus on the negative ones, even though there's only 2 of them. If I'm in that positive mood and I walk into that room, I'll focus on that 8. We call that filter the emotional refractory period. Now, it's a phenomenon that happens whether you want it to or not. Anytime you go through a psycho-emotional state change, the perceptual filters, what you pay attention to, changes. Your reality changes because your perception changes.
If you are to build rapport with someone, and let's say they're in a negative state, but for some reason you just want that rapport, maybe they're a hiring manager for a job or a hot girl, right, who's just in a bad mood. You don't necessarily want to take on that person's negative state, but you do want to have rapport to influence them and maybe lead them. How do you then go about doing them? Because you don't need to necessarily buy into their worldview, or you do.
Well, it helps at least for a moment to match their state. Because have you ever seen 2 water drops become 1 water drop?
Yes.
Okay. What happens is human beings have an interesting phenomenon. They have this thing called mirror neurons, and they have this desire for connection. They have a desire for alliance. You know, you ever heard saying misery loves company, right? Well, if you walk up to somebody, you have 2 choices on how to get them out of the state they're in. You can either interrupt it completely, which depending on the context and the environment may be more useful. Most people don't have the cojones to interrupt a state. All right. If you have good state control, you can go in, match their state, match their physiology, and then change your state, and they will follow you. The fastest way to change anybody's state is to change your own. But sometimes if you come in at too high an energy level, the difference between your frequency and theirs will make you bounce. So there's a range, you know, if you're vibrating like this, right, and you're coming in like this, it ain't going to happen. But if she's like this and you're like this, and you just kind of bring it down, you can raise her energy up. So interrupting a state is good, and then, but again, some states, and I can tell stories, but some states are too deep to interrupt. So you have to be very careful about who you're seeking to approach. But then again, matching the state, matching the physiology, connecting with them, echoing their words back to them will cause them to cleave to you. And that's really what I'm getting at is the minute somebody senses that connection, that you're on the same frequency, you're on the same wavelength, where they get the impression inside of them, whether it's something you've given them directly or indirectly through your ability to control your state, that you're like them, that they have a connection with you. That is something that neurologically they don't want to give up. They don't want to give that up because they've been validated. They've gotten support. They've gotten the okay signal that the things are right with them, that you approve of them in some unconscious, unspoken way, and they will follow you to keep it.
Once they have rapport, they don't want to lose rapport. Let's go into a little bit more into how you actually get that rapport, though.
Okay. Well, give me a context.
Well, let's go back to, say, the job interview.
Okay.
You've got an interviewer who is detached, poker-faced, revealing nothing. No matter how good the answer is, that person's like, like a robot. not revealing anything, right? How would you then go about building rapport, even if they're trying to mismatch you or potentially even be disagreeable or difficult?
I would do exactly what they're doing. You see, one of the things that happens, first of all, if somebody has an intention to alienate you, then the act of trying to supplicate to them, first of all, you have to be careful in that context because you're coming to the, you're in the subordinate position anyway. You'd have to reset the frame. I would start with some. Well, Mr. Smith, obviously it's important for you're looking for someone to take on a very important role in your company, and good people know good people, and it's important for me as a prospective employee before I take any job that might be offered, to know that there's a fit because I want to do the best job I can, but I also want to be happy in the place that I'm working, and I know you want somebody that will satisfy all of your requirements in a way that allows you to feel good about that. And just so I understand you better, what's important to you about the right person for this job? And then if they're not going to give me the information, then there's no fit. But once I've set that context, the information they give me is exactly what I'm going to talk about. The most powerful and most important words a person can hear. The fastest way to break the ice and send an unconscious signal to a person's neurology that you're exactly like them in a way that's pleasurable is to echo their words back to them almost verbatim. And use that as what we call a STEM technique. But honestly, the most important words any human being can hear at any given moment are the words that just came out of their mouth. But now, I need to jump back. You must set the context for why you just said what you're about to say. And you have to chunk up to do that. You have to think strategically now. If someone's taking you for a job interview, what's presupposed in that?
That you are potentially the right person for the job.
Well, they have a need, right? Isn't that they wouldn't be taking the interview if they didn't have a need.
Correct.
Right? So we start there, and this is true in negotiation too. We have to chunk up to where both sides understand each other. Both sides have agreement. When I chunk up like this, I can make generalizations about their situation that they can't argue with. When I've made generalizations about their situation that they can't argue with, I have paced their reality. The moment I've paced their reality, that's the second definition of pacing, to talk about things that are true in their experience, either subjectively or objectively. So if you go back on the podcast and you review what I said, there is no way that prospective employer could actually argue with anything that just came out of my mouth because they're all true in his experience. What's he going to do? Say, no, I don't have a job to fill? No, I don't know. No, I don't know what a perfect employee is like. The very act of stating those things and asking those questions in the right way causes him to go through the little filing cabinets in his brain.
Also, in addition to asking questions, you were getting that person to qualify themselves. As they're trying to get you to qualify yourself, you're getting them to qualify themselves and sell the job to you in some way, shape, or form, displaying the benefits and why it might be a place you want to work.
Absolutely, because remember that if I go in there supplicating, I lose all my power. But I'm looking for a right fit, just like he's looking for a right fit. So I show in a non-threatening, non-asshole-ish kind of way that I've got options, I've got self-esteem, and I can walk if I don't think it's a fit. Just the ability, Muad'Dib and Dune said it best. He who can destroy a thing controls a thing, right? For you science fiction buffs out there, go read Frank Herbert, you'll understand. It's the person with the power in the relationship is the person who can walk away. That's, again, validation. But you have to remember that you're in their world. So you can't draw that line in the sand in such a way that challenges their authority. It has to be very soft, very ambiguous, but under a subtext kind of a thing. What I did here in addition to going meta, is I triggered a series of psychological processes in him that caused him to paint me with a certain brush. What I mean by that is, remember those flip files I was just talking about? Each and every time I mentioned one of those things, he had a job he needs to fill. He knows what a perfect employee looks like. I triggered in his brain something known as a transderivational search. He went through the little filing cabinets in his brain, said, well, do I know what a perfect employee looks like, or what a model? He's going to find an example where somebody met that criteria. And all the feelings and all the characteristics of that person are going to flash into his brain, either consciously or unconsciously. Who's he looking at when those feelings come up? Right? Through the use of my state, my mirror neurons, my language, my intention, I get him to anchor those things to me at a subtle level. Now, as he talks about them, I get the exact words that trigger those feelings that amplify that state. So if you think about what setting the frame and opening those files, it's like the spark that creates the flame. Now, based on the languaging he gives me, and as I unpack what those things mean and the rules by which he establishes the ideal employee, I can fan that into an inferno. And he gave me all the information.
One thing that is core, central to what we're speaking about, we haven't really gone into it yet, so let's do that now, is framing.
Framing.
First of all, what is a frame? And then let's go into frame control. But first of all, what is a frame?
A frame is a point of view or a perspective that determines the meaning of a behavior or an interaction or a situation. I think the best example, I was rereading a very old book on attraction the other day, but a mystery method, as a matter of fact. So I'll use that as an example, since none of us are. Yeah, I know none of us are really interested in becoming attractive to women or anything like that. But and I think what Mystery was. I don't want to misquote him, but get the book Mystery Method. It's really a good read on overall social dynamics. You can take everything he's put in that book and apply it to any form of interaction. But let me see if I can remember the exact words he used. He got busted, or no, he didn't. No, that's not what he said. He got off. That's what it was. So someone comes and says he got off. Well, that's a very ambiguous statement until we wrap a context around it. Does the term "he got off" mean he was arrested? Does it mean he was sitting on something and he got off? Does it mean he had an orgasm? It's the context that determines the meaning. So the interesting thing about context is that, and from your conversations with Michael Hall, you may have elaborated this, is that they're infinitely malleable. You can change context. And the person that can control the context controls the meanings of the interaction and the behaviors generated from those meanings. So if I can, through my state control, through my perspectives, adopt a state or a point of view and hold it, I can cause that person, in spite of themselves, to give up their view of reality and buy into mine. The way I teach my students to do it is the person who holds the frame longest and strongest wins. Right?
He who controls the frame controls the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's something you have to hold, because every time you get into a situation with one or more individuals, there's going to be a frame war. There's going to be a battle of whose reality is dominant, who's subordinate. And you need to understand that. Now, when I teach my students is that, and this is a big challenge, is not your idea, your goal in any interaction, whether it's an interview, whether it's a date, whether it's teaching or negotiating, is not to be liked. It's not to be dominant. It's to be effective. It's to get your outcome. So the question for a master of influence becomes not how do I dominate this frame, is who do I need to be to control this frame? Sometimes I need to be the subordinate in order to get the person I'm interacting with to behave in a predictable, desirable manner. Sometimes I need to treat them as an equal. I need to be an equal to them. And I have to find the frame inside of myself that allows me to adopt that position. And when I hold it long enough and strong enough through my state control, which is a kinesthetic phenomena, my posture and my breathing, my point of view, they will buy into it. They will fight it, but the longer I hold it, the more rapidly and not try to defend it. Here's the first thing you understand. The minute you have to defend your frame, you've lost it.
In any interaction, there's an authority, an expert, an alpha, a leader, even between two friends. How do you then go about identifying what would be the appropriate frame to take on? You even mentioned being subordinate in some instances. or an equal or a leader or whatever, how do you go about identifying the frame or the context that you should take on or the person you should be? How do you go about doing that?
What's my outcome? First thing I got to do is figure out my outcome, right? Then I have to ask, okay, who does this person need to be to take the actions that I want them to take? And what states do they have for them to want to take those actions? That's almost always going to go down to what's in it for them, right? So who I need to be in any given interaction is predicated on based on my ability to acquire information about the subject. Now, this is one of the places that most people they don't even address this, even though it's a huge part of of being an influencer, is being able to pay attention to the behaviors and the languaging of people, to know as much about your subject or your target as humanly possible. When I was studying kinetic interview and interrogation in my undergrad, I was coming to that crossroads where I was either going to go into healthcare or law enforcement, and I promptly saw how much they made, how much stress level they were in, and chose healthcare. There comes a moment, my instructor said, if I know you better than you know me, I can influence you. If I know you better than you know yourself, I can control you. And that's what I2 of our killer influence model is about. It's about profiling people. It's about getting inside their head and figuring out who they are, what their motivation is, how they express it, what are their micro expressions, what are their values, what is it they really want, right? And as we learn about those things, and NLP has some very strong skills in that area as well. As we learn about those things, the art of influence gets easier. We talked about, jumping back to our job interview model. If the guy's not giving me a lot of information and I just start riffing off my resume, I'm doing the equivalent of a features and benefits presentation. I don't know what's important to him and what isn't. When I start talking about me, I only want to talk about me in respect to what's important to him.
You need to know his buying criteria. You can't get it unless you ask questions.
You've got to know what his emotional hot buttons are. And you've got to know, this is important, you've got to know how he recognizes that. It's on one level, it's okay to talk about things like respect and safety and security and punctuality and good work ethic. But you also need to know, how does he recognize that? What's his strategy for knowing when somebody has a good work, if that's important to him? A self-starter, someone who's motivated to take charge first. How does he know? And I'm going to do the exact same thing I did when I set the context originally, is I'm going to ask him. Just the act of asking that question opens that window, that aperture into past experiences where he's had them. Now, the most powerful experiences a person has are their memories. The minute you open up a memory, everything connected to that memory gets activated. The associations, the criteria, the values, but most importantly, the emotions. And the minute you've activated somebody on the emotional level, you've generated a sequence of body feelings that change their perceptual filters. They start looking at you through the lens you've just created. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I want to go back a step. If you were speaking to a control freak,
like
right?
me?
So let's say you were in a sales situation, right? If you were speaking to a control freak, you would then reinforce their sense of control, their sense of autonomy, to know that they had the final say, they had the final choice. That might be one way to subordinate yourself, to fit into their frame, to influence and persuade them to do what you want them to do. Is that right?
First thing I'm going to do is give them back their own sense of choice. You see, one of the things you have to understand about, there's a process we teach in our systems, and it's based on a book called Instant Influence by Michael Pantalon. If you haven't seen it or read it, I highly recommend you do that. We call it the autonomizer formula. One of the things that happens with people, especially in cases where you're getting somebody to, there's something that you want them to do that they don't want to do, the most powerful way to get somebody to do something they just told you they don't want to do is to have them generate their own reasons for doing it, even if they're completely made up. Because if the human neurology does not resist itself, this is something you can take to the bank. If the neurology has generated it, the neurology will accept it. This is true in our healing applications. This is true in our influence applications. That's why I keep going back to this idea that the most important words a human being can ever hear are the ones that just came out of their mouth. But if I have somebody who's got obvious control issues, I would actually start with that words. It's obvious that being in control of the situation is important to you. It's obvious that autonomy is really what's important. I want just so I understand you better and just so that we are on the same page, I'm here to support you. If you want to go forward, we'll go forward. If you want to hold back or pull back, we'll go back. It's entirely up to you. I'm going to support you either way. My job is to make sure that there's a fit one way or another. If there is, great, we'll go forward. If there isn't, then you know what? We'll find another way to do this. I'm sure we can. There's either another client or another agent that you can work with that may be a better fit for you. But I am curious about something. If you were to want to go forward with this project, for your reasons, not your boss's reasons, not your wife's reasons, not your kids' reasons, not your colleagues' reasons. Why might you want to go forward with that? Right? Now, whatever they say, I'm going to agree with. And say, you know what? I agree with you. I think you got a valid point there. So just so I understand you better, I'm going to ask a weird question because, again, maybe this will work, maybe it won't. I'm going to support you either way on a scale of 0 to 10. Based on what you told me, how much might you want to do that? Right? And the minute they give me, first of all, they're going to look at you like this. They're going to go, what? Because they think, well, actually, they're going to give me a number. Maybe they say it's a 4. They wanted, based on their reason for doing it is an intensity level of a 4. I'm going to say, fantastic. So just so I understand you better, why didn't you rate it less? Why so much? And they're going to go, what? Because they're expecting me to challenge why they didn't want it more. Right? So they go, well, and then they're going to, when I say, well, why didn't you rate it less? Why do you want this so much? Even if it's a 4. Their neurology is going to generate a justification, a rationalization for why they want it at that intensity level. In the process of generating the rationalization for why they want that so much, they will increase their desire. That 4 will jump to a 5 or a 6 or a 7.
I was going to ask you about that because what if they were to give you, say, a 3 or a 4?
Doesn't matter.
But the reasons they give you aren't really that compelling. How do you then go about increasing that number, increasing those reasons, getting them to provide even more fuel to the fire?
First of all, you start with whatever they give you. If they give you a 1, you do that. If they give you a 0.5, you just chunk down. You just keep chunking down from a global to a more specific piece until you start to get nonverbal agreement. Then you drill down into the criterion values of it. Right? Just like you would elicit criterion values for something much more global. Because first of all, just the act of changing them from why they don't want to do it to generating a reason why they might want to do it, now they're in the bubble, they've changed their own frame. If this were the case, this is why I would want to do it. They've already adopted that frame. They're operating within that bubble. Now you're chunking down even deeper into the bubble that contains the decision they made that was completely different from what they said they want to do. And as they generate more and more reasons for why they want to do it, because what did I do there? Why so much? Why didn't you rate it less? I just challenged them. I just challenged their belief. The belief that gets challenged directly, rationally, grows stronger. You ever try to logic a girl into going out with you?
Does not work.
It does not work. I've taken the exact same mechanism that we would use in rhetorical argument to beat somebody over the head with the facts, and I've turned it in the opposite direction. In other words, that same mechanism that could have derailed me if I tried to logic them into why they would want to do it is now generating resistance towards the thing I want them to do.
It's almost like a form of reverse psychology, isn't it?
It's a little bit more sophisticated than that, but it is a form of, that's why we call it the resistance removal formula, because it's not, well, I don't want you to do that. That's very blatant. It's very obvious. But when you soften it and you pre-frame it, I'm controlling frames throughout this entire interaction, right? First frame was, I want to do this. You don't want to do that. Okay, great. If there was, if you were, first of all, the first thing I do is establish an autonomy frame where I'm on their side. I'm on their side. I don't want to do something that you don't want to do. I don't want to get you to do something that's against your will. I'm going to support you no matter what decision that, and I have to be sincere about that because people have great bullshit detectors. What you'll find though is the minute you've given somebody back their sense of free choice, their sense of autonomy, they become much more malleable to external influence. It's just how it works. So when you give somebody that support, the right to say no without feeling incriminated or attacked, and that you're going to actually support them on it, and just so I understand you better, if you were, just play with me a little bit, if you were to want to do this for your reasons, now here, this is where it gets important, for your reasons, why? Why might you want to do that? Now, why questions activate a different part of the brain functionally than what questions or how questions. Why questions activate the neocortex? They activate the rationalization generating mechanism. We call it the rational lying brain. So when I ask someone why they want to do something, they're going to elicit a rationale, a lie to themselves and to ourselves. It's a belief system they create on the moment for why they would, a point of view. It's a frame. As they talk about it, and they hear it coming back from me, they feel heard, they feel connected, they feel justified because I'm using their exact words. If I need to go deeper, I'll elicit criteria and values. I may ask, so just so I understand you better, and so to make sure that we're getting everything exactly right for you, thinking about it like this, what's important to you about this XYZ? What'll that do for you? Right? Now I'm eliciting the criteria, the emotional drivers behind a reason they generated on the fly, which is completely opposite of what they said they wanted to do in the first place. But as they go deeper into that process, they buy into it more and more. They adopt the new frame. They never stop to think, in most cases, I didn't want to do this in the first place. They start thinking about why I want to do it and what I'm going to get from it. That's a completely different place to come from to say, no, I don't want to do that. Right? And then the close can be very, very simple. One of two ways that I close people most of the time. So what's the next step that we need to take to move this forward? And whatever they give you, whether it's a big step or a little step, you agree with, and in a very nonchalant, casual way, you take that next step. Now you've moved them incrementally along the path that they told you they wanted to go to do what you wanted them to do. Right? Again, one of the things you got to be careful of in that moment is that you make sure that you're like the fish, the new fisherman, right? The little bobbers out there on the water, the fish hits, it hits once, you go, yeah, and you yank the fish, right, the hook right out of the fish, right? You got to let them go with it. If, when I'm working with clients clinically, if I say, I'm curious, what's the next step we need to take, to go forward? He goes, well, I guess I need to go make an appointment. Okay, well, let's go ahead and walk you out there. Do you have any other, before we go out there and you make an appointment, do you have any other questions that I can answer for you? Nope. And just asking that one question alleviates their need to say no, because at some point during that conversation, they don't want to feel manipulated. They want to feel in control. You give them an opportunity to say no to something that's not going to derail the sale, and they've gotten rid of that pressure. Another thing I might do is say, okay, so how soon do you want to get started? And whatever they say is, next week. Okay, good. Today, great. Let's go talk to Lisa or Jesse or whoever's working the front desk, or let's go ahead and get the papers drawn up and move forward with that. And again, that's most of the time, that's my close. What's the next step we need to take, or how soon do you want to get started?
Do you spend a lot of time overcoming objections before they come up?
Yes. When you start doing, first of all, if you're engaged in a business that still embraces the features and benefits presentation, you're going to be spending a lot more time having to deal with objections and thinking about objections before they come up than if you're adopting a relationship-based form of presentation, which is what we call criteria and values presentation. By and large, a criteria and values presentation gets almost no objections, because you're tapping into exactly what a person wants, the way they know they're getting it. You're attaching the exact emotional triggers to yourself and to the service that you're offering in such a way that you're only talking about the things they want to buy. So a lot of times when your criteria and values are done properly, there won't be objections. If you're doing features and benefits type stuff, then you have to spend a lot more time stepping back, stepping into your prospect, or the avatar of your prospect. It's a marketing term. The avatar of your prospect, and living life from their perspective and coming up with their own objections. being who they are, being in their position, and objecting to the things you're presenting. And based on what those objections are, now you can sit down. You can use Michael Hall's work. You can use Kendrick Cleveland's work on sleight of mouth, Robert Diltz's work on sleight of mouth. You can begin to create series or layers of potential responses to those objections.
The pre-buttal, as it's known, the pre-buttal, the anticipation of the objection,
Mm-hmm.
and then how you would then overcome it. Yeah.
Yeah, if you can answer their objections before they ever leave their mouth, you're going to go a long way towards removing the friction for them saying yes.
When I think of frame control, three of the greatest masters that I can think of were the late Steve Jobs, Tony Robbins,
Yep.
and Donald Trump.
Okay.
Three absolute masters of frame control. They will not enter into your reality. They force you to enter into theirs. And even if you won't enter their reality, they still won't enter yours. Right. So their interpretation, their perspective is the only correct one. We'll leave Steve Jobs alone because he's passed. But let's say with Tony Robbins and with Donald Trump, why do you think they are so persuasive? What makes their frames so incredibly powerful from your perspective?
Perceived authority, social status. Human beings are intrinsically hardwired to be suggestible and compliant to perceive social status. And that's one of the things that you need to understand is from the time we crawled out of the ocean, we have lived our societies, our cultures, everything in a hierarchy. And so, Milgram explored in the 50s, I think it was, when he did all of his crazy experiments with people, getting them to shock actors and tricking them into believing they were administering lethal shock to people just to see how far they would go based on somebody who in perceived authority told them to do it. When human beings are presented with authority, legitimate authority is obviously the ultimate, but it just has to be the perception of legitimate authority. We will become compliant. Authority has and we're talking about influence, we're talking about 4 categories basically of influence that can be had. First of all, people who are physically intimidating, physically large, will generate a level of authority that they may not actually deserve just because of their physical stature. But guys like Donald Trump, who has not only financial authority and high status, now he has executive status. He has the ability to enforce the decisions and the mandates that he makes. That is the ultimate level of authority. Now, he used to be he was a CEO, then he became the president. But even before that, he had celebrity status because, not before that, but in the middle of it, because of his show, The Apprentice. He had tremendous visibility, tremendous recognition. And so and by the way, as an aside, from my perspective, I have yet to see the United States not elect a personality that has been on TV for any prolonged period of time. Everything from Jesse Ventura, who became, I think it was Louisiana or I can't remember.
Minnesota, I think it was Minnesota. Yeah.
He was on wrestling. They elected him governor. Sonny Bono, Clint Eastwood, Ronald Reagan, Gopher from the Love Boat, Ted Gandy, Arnold Schwarzenegger, all the way. And we idolize these people. They create an illusion of authority that we buy into. And that was one of the things that strategically Trump set out to undermine. He understood the power of the media to create the illusion of authority in its celebrities. So the first thing
sorry, continue. There you go.
Well, and so from my perspective, again, I'm not political at all. I honestly, I'm rather ambivalent on that, which may piss some people off, but that's just life. I'm a survivor. I'm going to survive and thrive in whatever climate I'm in. But I predicted that Trump would actually win that election a year before anybody took him seriously. But it wasn't based on his politics. It was based on the tools of influence he was using. He utilized the media, and he turned the entire election into reality TV, which is what he does best. Right? Once he had that, as soon as he got into power, he vilified the very media that he used because he wanted to undermine their authority. He went from perceived authority to executive authority, and now he wanted to bust that bubble so that people, and he did rather easily. He created such a hysterical outcry and irrationality in the media that nobody can take anything seriously anymore.
It's not the news. It's the fake news. It's the enemy of the people.
He assigns a label to it. The minute he assigns a label, people will accept it, right? But now he's gone from the reason Trump is so successful is because of the authority he exudes and the irrational frames he holds, right?
Also because he's so damn incredibly certain of everything that he believes, as is Tony Robbins. I was saying to you just before we started recording, Tony Robbins can make you believe anything, whether he's right or wrong.
State control.
Right? Just because he's so damn certain. Certainty for me is the magic bullet when it comes to influence and persuasion. If you want to go into that a little bit as well,
certainty is a state.
How do we go about getting that certainty if we don't have it? If we have an uncertain type of personality, an unsure, unconfident type of personality, how do we go about building that certainty?
Start with your posture and your physiology. Okay, the science is there. I've been teaching advanced applications of this for almost 20 years now, but Amy Cuddy in her work Power Poses has kind of done some good solid science on the fact that your physiology controls your psychology. For every psycho-emotional state that you have or that you can enter, there is a corresponding posture and breathing pattern that facilitates it. Okay, and we can play with that. We can have you go into a state of, imagine a time in your life when you saw something you really wanted. You decided then and there that you were going to go get it no matter what. You made a plan. You put that plan into operation and you nailed it. Home run. Right? I want you to see what you saw, hear what you heard, feel what you felt, but most importantly, stand and breathe the way you were standing and breathing in that moment. Just the act of holding that posture and that breathing pattern will generate that state within you. When you're in that state and you know you've got it without changing anything, not your posture, not your breathing, as an act of will, try to feel bad. And what you'll notice, again, I'm just front loading here for the sake of the interview. If this were a webinar or something, I'd actually be having the webinar people doing this. Try to feel bad. You'll notice you can't. And when you try to feel bad consciously, your body posture will want to shift. But if you consciously, cognitively hold that physiology, you can't enter the negative state. Every state a human being has a physiology. If you can adopt, it's a feedback loop. Well, most of us are taught that our mind controls our body. Well, that's only true in people who are trained. If you're an elite athlete, a special forces soldier, or somebody who's spent a lot of time in these first responders, somebody who spent a lot of time in these high pressure environments, then you have a more developed level of willpower than the average human being. But even then, how does brainwashing actually work in these kind of people? They physically wear you down. It's your physical resources that support your cognitive resources. And so conversely, if I can get your body in a certain configuration that leads to a certain set of emotional states, your body will reliably go there. So you can influence that from both ends of the spectrums. The difference between a physiology-based state control intervention and a willpower-based intervention is that your environment, it's very hard for your environment to overwhelm you when you're using physiology. It's very easy for your critical faculty and your willpower to get overwhelmed by the environment when you're just relying on willpower. Okay, your willpower is a finite resource. If you're familiar with the work of Roy Baumeister, he wrote a book called Willpower. It's called Willpower Depletion Theory. The cognitive resources that you have are burned up every time you have to use your willpower to control an emotional response or engage in deep level analytical thinking. You burn up the fuel in the tank. It's like pressing the gas bank or the accelerator pedal on your gas car and just spinning the tires. Eventually, you're going to run out of gas. When that happens, the nervous system defaults back to its pre-programmed hedonistic programs, or I guess for lack of a better word, it's routines that it runs. It goes to heuristics. Right? This is why you can be doing great on a diet for 3 solid weeks. You have a bad day at the office, and next thing you know, you're up to your waist in pizza and beer out of the refrigerator. Why? Because you burn through so many emotional resources and state shifts that day, you got nothing left in the tank. And the two things that replenish willpower physiologically are sugar, like glucose, and sleep. That's why if you're in the sales world, and you're working a regular 5-day work week, you'll tend to make more sales on Monday than you will on Friday. You've just come off a weekend, your brain is relaxed, you're refreshed, you have willpower to spare, cognitive resources to burn. Towards the end of the week, you start losing that. You start getting tired. You start yearning for the weekend again. More breakups actually occur, based on Facebook stats. This was a few years ago. I don't know if it's true anymore, but more breakups occur on a Friday than any other day of the week.
Interesting.
Because we're just tired. We're just tired of their bullshit. Right.
Interesting. Like I was saying, certainty for me is the magic bullet. You can get people to believe anything if you're certain. Like ridiculous, conspiracy theories or religious fairy tales. People will give you their money, their time. They'll work for you for free. They'll have sex with you. They'll even kill or die for you, right?
Absolutely.
And like, for example, with cult leaders, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because if you are an absolute subject matter expert, David, and then there's no way that I can convince you if I don't know the facts, and you do. You will not be moved because because you've done your research, you've done your homework, you have the experience. If you're a subject matter expert, you will not have your mind changed by anyone who isn't even more of a subject matter expert. However, there are some people who believe their own bullshit, like cult leaders, right? Do you think, I want to just kind of go into this quickly, do you think that some of those cult leaders, that they actually do believe their bullshit? Like, for example, that there is going to be aliens coming down to take people up, a mass alien abduction, or the world will end in 2012, or whatever the case may be? Or do you think that they wanted to just fool people, and then they convinced themselves, they brainwashed themselves before brainwashing others?
I think it's a little bit of both. There's a phenomena that happens in charisma-based leaders. It's a psychological phenomenon known as grandiosity. And so what happens is people gather around a charismatic leader, that they start to generate for lack of a better word, an energy flow into that leader. That leader starts to derive more and more energy from the attention that they get from that crowd. And so what happens is that attention tends to expand, and it fills a void within them. Most of us have some narcissistic tendencies, but especially with charismatic narcissists, leadership narcissists, there's a massive void, a lack of identity inside of them that is like a chasm waiting to be filled. It's a gnawing hunger that they have, and the more attention they garner, the more that gets fed. But it's like that first potato chip. You may not have thought about a potato chip for a solid week or a month. You have one, all of a sudden you want the next one. Well, it's just like that for narcissistic leaders, and most forms of charismatic leaders have that need to be in front of people because it's part of who they are. But in narcissistic leaders, that void generates a desire for even more. And as the energy flows in and they expand and become who they usually are very effective up to a certain point. And then the energy flow coming in has expanded their sense of who they are to where they're no longer human in their own mind. They're gifted. They're touched by God. They're the Messiah. They're meant to lead these people, because obviously that's what these people are here for, is to serve, right? And so the people that they were originally there to serve now become his servants or her servants. And what happens is that it's called grandiosity. If you read Robert Greene's new book, Human Nature, excellent book. He goes into this in very vivid detail. I've spoken about this phenomena, not using those words, but the more energy someone gets in, the more it expands who they are inside. So little character flaws become eccentricities, become gaping, psychopathies as more and more of this energy and this attention reaches them. Their sense of self expands to the point where they no longer consider themselves like everybody else. In their desire to gain some level of identity, they take on this sense of mission, of megalomania, and everybody else is just there to facilitate that.
This is why, for me, critical thinking is so damn important. We should be teaching our children critical thinking, not religion. Once they have critical thinking and they know logical fallacies, cognitive biases, then they can screen the information themselves, because once a belief takes place, once it's infiltrated your mind, it can be damn near impossible the amount of Christians, for example, who then have enough information and facts and evidence that should persuade them otherwise, that still have that lingering fear of hell, that just holds them in place within the Catholic Church or Christianity or Islam or whatever religion they belong to. They can't be swayed, or it's very difficult to be, to be moved from that position that they've taken on within childhood when they lack those critical faculties. They didn't have those critical thinking skills. I was going to ask you, just in regard to charisma, some personalities obviously more charismatic than others, but is charisma something that can be learnt? And
Absolutely.
if so, how?
Well, first of all, a lot of charisma is based on your posture and your breathing. You'll find there are very few people that, when they're exerting charisma, don't have very good posture. The minute they turn it off, their posture shifts again. But your posture and your breathing are huge, huge, huge factors in this. Your vocal qualities, which are actually more readily modulated by the body feelings that you have. Your ability to project emotion is one of the single biggest characteristics of charisma. You look at an actor, yes, Brad Pitt is stunningly gorgeous. He's a good-looking guy. But when he speaks, there's also a resonance, an energy that he projects through his voice. And it's the ability to project emotion, direct emotion through your voice that is one of the hallmarks of charisma. To be very expressive and dynamic. These are things that activate a person's neurology and make them more compelling. So while some people who are naturally charismatic, all these switches are already flipped on, they can be cultivated, they can be activated in people who are not charismatic, and they can turn on and turn off their charisma by understanding these mechanisms. And this is why when I teach my students, I tell people up front the most powerful actors on the planet are actors. Their whole craft is designed to do one thing and one thing only, to suck you out of your reality and right into theirs, right? And it's their ability to generate that presence, to speak and to activate your imagination and your emotions. That's what charisma really is that ability to activate the emotionals in somebody and link it to yourself, and to direct that emotion towards a specific end. And you can do that through a combination of breathing, physiology, understanding your emotions, understanding your voice inflections and tonality. Again, this is the micro level. Remember, people who are naturally charismatic, they're flipped on up here, so all those things trickle down. For people who are learning these things, they have to learn it from the small pieces up, unless you understand state control. If you understand state control, you can adopt a body feeling and a frame that generates charisma. In my classes, we call it the Rockstar Metaframe and the Master and Commander technique. And it's as simple as playing pretend. If you were to just imagine what it would like to be your favorite rock star, right? And you just step into them and imagine everybody in the world just recognizing you wherever you went. Everybody was there to see you. And you just move through the world feeling that way. You would find that the vast majority of people would be much more attentive and pay much more attention to you, in spite of the fact that you probably look nothing like that guy or that girl.
Simply because of the way you carry yourself and portray yourself.
It's mediated through mirror neurons. The mirror neurons of every human being are sensitive to the empathic data being transmitted. If you take on a certain feeling with a certain intention, with congruity inside of you, and congruity deepens over time. The longer you stay in that physiology, the more it becomes your dominant physiology. That's the beauty of it. The person's mirror neurons that you interact with will pick up on that intention, and it will activate either the complementary response or a similar response in them. So let's say, for example, we're talking about attraction. I teach a lot about attractivity states in a lot of my trainings. When I generate a feeling of being attractive in myself, and I'm congruent in that state, and I move through the world feeling genuinely attractive, I'm like the most attractive person in the room, I will generate one of two states within people most of the time. I will either cause the person I'm relating to feel attractive as well, or I will cause them to feel attracted as well. Either way, they're feeling good around me. Guess what gets linked to me, right? So many times when you start to generate those feelings of attraction, there will be people who have an envious mindset. They will try to poison the frame. One of two things will happen. First of all, if they're acting from envy, you've already won the frame, right? Second of all, the only thing they can do is either fight for the frame, and hopefully they win. Usually they won't if you're strong enough, or they have to leave. Either way, problem solved.
let's go into this a little bit more. I wanted to speak to you
Hmm.
about deframing, reframing. You've mentioned metaframing. We haven't really defined that. Trump reframed the media as the fake news and the enemy of the people, which, to be honest, I found absolutely hilarious. I found
Hmm.
that absolutely hilarious. Uh, let's talk about reframing. How do you go about reframing the media, for example? I think it is helpful to reframe a lot of what the media, everything is painted in the negative, what's wrong.
Hmm. Well, media. The problem we have with media is they've stopped reporting the news and just started creating it. Back if you and you don't have to believe me to see this. Go back to the news reports of the 60s and the 70s and look at how the commentators reported the news. Most of what was being done, even then we were still influencing public opinion. But what happened was people they would play a video or they would play a sound gap or a clip of an interview and they would just report what was there. And every now and then the commentator would throw out a comment or an opinion. Now they're playing a clip and they're telling you what it means as they're playing it, rather than letting you see the actual data in its most unabridged form or unadulterated form. They're narrating. They're controlling the narrative of what you're seeing. So they're creating the frame around what you're seeing and using the pace of it, the fact that you're seeing what they're talking about, to support it. It's a cause and effect. If I were teaching you hypnotic language, we would tell you that's a cause and effect structure or a complex equivalent structure. Your X causes your Y. The X is always something that's true, something that's verifiable through the five senses. That's exactly what your media is doing. They're showing you something that you're verifying through your five senses. They're using a cause and effect structure and telling you what it's causing or what it means. Right? If you understand cause and effect languaging and you understand that the media is supposed to just show you the stuff, not tell you what it means, then you can start to unpack it. But that's not what's happening now. Now every news media has an agenda. Every one of them have a point of view. They're either pro or against. They're trying to spin the frames around everything that you see. So when you start to reframe or reframe, metaframe, or deframe, what you're really doing is you're deliberately changing the point of view by which you're analyzing that information or experiencing that information. That's the beauty of being a human being, is we can change perspectives. We can ask different questions. We can have thoughts about our thoughts and feelings about our feelings. That ability is what Michael Hall is talking about in his when he's talking about metaprogramming and things like that. It's the ability to move above what we're thinking about and think about what we're thinking about that allows us to break it apart, or in some cases to immerse ourselves in it.
I want you to define these a little bit clearer though. A D-frame, what is that?
A deframe is where we chunk down. We get more specific about a particular piece of a frame or a story, and we break it apart. So one of the most common ways to deframe something is what they call the chunk down or the reality strategy. So someone might say something to the effect of, the media is nothing but fake news. Well, if you want to break that frame apart, that's, first of all, that whole thing, all media is fake news. That's a generalization. It's a massive, broad generalization. The only thing you need to do to start to destroy that frame is find a counterexample. But the way you find a counterexample is you have to go into that belief, into the tiny pieces of it, and find one or two that you could just blow apart. So you might ask a simple question. Well, how specifically? What specifically about the media makes it all fake? Have they ever reported anything true? The minute they say, who's going to say no? They've never reported anything true. The minute they do that, they've blown apart their own. You've broken the frame, because what that whole statement was a generalization and a distortion. The minute you find one piece that invalidates the whole, you've deframed them. You've broken it apart, and now you can start to attack each piece, or they come back. They may try to reframe your reframe.
Will you always, as a rule of thumb, deframe before reframing, or sometimes can you reframe but without deframing?
You can do a lot of things. Robert Dilts, in his efforts to model Richard Bandler, isolated between 14 and now it's up to around 24 different ways to reframe or deframe something. Now, the first thing you have to, if you want to talk, and I actually did a whole 2-day class on this not too recently. If you want to attack a frame, there's several ways you can do it, but you first have to understand what a frame is and what it's made out of. A frame is a belief system. A frame is just a belief system. A belief system has 2 or 3 basic components to it. It has a cause and an effect, or a cause and an equivalence. In other words, X is going to cause a Y. In other words, there's a linear sequential kind of a relationship to something. Like if you say, if I say, tell me something you believe in this, and a person says, well, I believe the sun will come up tomorrow. Well, they've given you half of the belief. They've given you that they believe the sun will come up tomorrow, but they haven't given you the cause, which is the reason they believe it. So you might ask a simple question like, because? And they say, well, because it came up yesterday. Now you've unpacked both sides of the belief. Now that you have both sides of the belief uncovered, you can attack either one. Right? So what I teach my students when we're dealing with breaking up frames or reframing, the first thing you have to do is you have to unpack it to attack it. You have to unpack both sides of the belief, because when people give you an objection or they tell you something they believe, a good percentage of the time they won't give you the other one half of the belief equation. So when someone espouses a belief, you need to establish the cause. Why do they believe it? Once you've gotten both halves of that, you have 14 or 15 different ways that you can attack it. The first and easiest ones are to deframe it. In other words, to chunk down. What specifically about the cause creates the effect, or what specifically, how does the effect relate to the cause? The minute you start breaking those apart and attacking them, the whole belief starts to crumble. It becomes changeable. The other type of belief that you're going to have is what we call a complex equivalence. In other words, the X is still something that's true, but now we've assigned a meaning to it where one is the same as the other. So if I would, you could think of, I call this bumper sticker thinking. Whenever you've ever seen a bumper sticker that says time is money, right? You've heard that saying many times. Well, time is money. Time and money are the same. They are the same thing, right? You'll when you're dealing with married couples, you'll hear this saying, if he loved me, he would have been there. Being there is the same as loving. That's an equivalence. So human beings are constantly driven to derive a cause and effect relationship and then assign a meaning to it, which is how beliefs are all created. And then when you talk to people in that structure, they tend to accept what you say as a belief. The inverse of what we're talking about now is breaking that up. We unpack it to attack it. So the first thing we want to do is we always, always, always want to elicit both halves of their belief. And then depending on where I see the weakest point, that's what I'll attack. I'll usually attack it with a deframe and a reality strategy. So I might say something like, well, what specifically about X causes Y? And how do you know? Is it something you see, something you feel, something you hear? And I might also, and as they start to answer, I might compound that, because now I've actually created by actually attacking that, you'll actually see them get a look of confusion on their face. They'll be like, in that moment of confusion, it's equivalent to a shock induction. They become hyper-suggestible. You might say something like, well, how do you know? Maybe you don't. Maybe what it really means is this, and you just thought it was Y.
Most beliefs are accepted uncritically. A lot of people don't even know why they believe what they believe. And it's true. It seems incredibly stupid of most people to attack a belief, to attack a conclusion, to attack an opinion without knowing any of the evidence or the reasons used to support it. I don't care what you believe. If you tell me that you believe people are living on Jupiter, I'm like, okay, cool. Why do you believe it? Like, I don't care what your conclusion is, only the reasons used to support it. But most people don't do that. They just make a snap judgment about the conclusion that it's right or wrong, a black and white judgment, but they don't have any of the facts behind it. And maybe you are right. Maybe the conclusion is right or wrong, but still you need to do a little bit of digging before you draw that conclusion.
Yeah, it's because in a lot of the books on Sleight of Mouth, they reference a guy named Polya, who was a mathematician, and Polya wanted to ask. He was a mathematician. He wanted to understand the same question: how do people come to believe bullshit? How do people come to believe things that are just not verified or researched or whatever? And he identified different patterns that are called patterns of plausible inference. And he in Doug O'Brien's book, Sleight of Mouth, he actually has a whole section on that. I highly recommend. It's just too complicated to go into here. My brain crosses anytime numbers come out. But there are patterns that cause people to accept something as plausible. To the human neurology, plausibility is analogous to belief. fact, Eric Knowles' work on research resistance and persuasion says the same thing. The brain doesn't care about true or false. It cares about plausible or not plausible. If something is completely true but implausible, the brain will still reject it. Whereas if it's not true but entirely plausible, the brain is most likely to accept and act upon it as if it's true. So when you're dealing with cause and effect structures, which is what all beliefs are made out of, that's why I keep talking, that X causes Y formula is what our entire belief system is based on. And once you understand that, everything starts to make sense. It goes back to the X causes Y. X being whatever is true or whatever you've experienced, and then whatever causal relationship you want to assign to it. Kind of open loop myself there for a minute. Where'd I go with it? But anyway, going back to attacking these things, you need to figure out. Usually, the most useful way is to just break it apart. Another way to do it is what we call a redefine. A redefine is where we basically are telling people this is not what you thought it meant. It means this instead. So you might say, all media is fake news. You might say, well, it's not that all media is fake news. It's just some media professionals really like to make up their own news stories. Right? See how I've taken it from an absolute to just some people? I've redefined the cause.
I like the way that you haven't completely destroyed their worldview, which could lead them to be offsides and get defensive.
That's the most important piece.
You've incorporated the worldview and you've added some distinctions to it.
Mm-hmm. You'll never go wrong using people's own stuff back to them. The problem we have with people who try to learn these reframing technologies is they use them like a blunt object.
Like a weapon.
They just want to beat you over the head with it. And you can create tremendous belief shifts in people using the exact same pattern with almost the exact same words, but completely diametrically opposed just by how you present the attack. Going back to that redefine, all media is fake news. It's not that all media is fake news. It's just that some people are idiots, right? Now, my delivery was much different. I don't think it's all media is fake news. I think it's just that is it possible that just some people just want a little bit more attention, and so they embellish things to a much greater degree than others? Right? See just how I changed it to a permissive, even though it was the same pattern. I tried to keep the verbiage roughly the same, but it causes you to consider a possibility, whereas before I was beating you over the head with it.
A lot of it's fake news, but you've got to take it on a case-by-case, statement-by-statement basis.
Right. So now I've created leverage in you where you're thinking about, oh, that's a frame shift. Because before, that belief was set in stone. It was cast iron. Now it's changeable. It's melting. And now I have movement. Once I have movement, I can start to unpack or reframe or use some of the other tools in our reframing toolkit. I could go to what we call a model of the world strategy. In my world, in today's age, it might be okay to make up news as you go, but in the world I grew up in, people that made up stuff, they would call them liars, right? And that's what we call a model of the world. In this model of the world, it means this, but in my world, it means Y. And if I've gotten rapport with you and I've aligned with you using your words, you want to be with me, right? And so the more like you I become, and then I make a slight shift, you start to see it from that perspective too. I didn't tell you to think about it my way. You just started to. Does that make sense?
It does. Something that just came to mind in regard to reframing is, and you mentioned it earlier in the interview, if someone poisons the frame. If someone poisons the frame, and I thought of two examples. For example, let's just say that you're out at a club or a bar or a pub, and someone tries to dominate you and tries to paint themselves as the alpha, you as the beta. That was the first kind of question that came to mind. How would you reframe that? And I know that there are a million different,
Well, let's just say, let's say the guy let's say you're working a set, guy just comes up, starts, amogging you, basically just starts talking. I'd look at him and say, does that approach ever actually work for you? You see? It's like all of a sudden I've taken this, instead of going, you can't come into my set. Does that actually ever work? It's like all of a sudden he's doing something pathetic, right? I've changed. I didn't get upset. I didn't get angry. Does that ever actually work?
What if he's beat you to the punch though? For example, what if he you've entered a set with a couple of girls, right? He immediately wants to cock block you, and he says, "Oh, this guy looks creepy. I think this guy is a creep," right? Because that can
Well, I
immediately
think,
poison the perception of you before you've even had a chance to.
creepy people often say that. And
Anything
that's
can be
called
reframed.
apply to self. That's also a reframe. He looks creepy. I was like, creepy people often say that, right? And all of a sudden, boom, he just got burned. He just got hoisted on his own petard, right? Um,
It's an extreme example, but it's an extreme example. It's a big one. But what about these guys that they get it doesn't necessarily have to come through like a Me Too, like a sexual harassment type of accusation, but their reputation gets kind of smashed by the media, and a lot of people, like a celebrity, they have difficulty coming back from it. How then,
mhm.
when you've got the media, and Trump is probably the best example of someone who seems almost invulnerable, like it doesn't matter what the media say about him, he just comes out on top seemingly. But a lot of celebrities, for example, you'll get, say, Kevin Hart recently making maybe a homophobic slur from like 5 years ago, and now they're saying, like, is that the end of his career or something like that? How do you then go about it when it's on a major scale where you've got the media attacking you and just poisoning the public perception of you?
Well, hopefully, I'll never be in that position, but I'm sure it will. It will happen eventually. Uh, it's very difficult when you've got so many voices that are controlling people and putting people in a very hyper suggestible state and hypnotizing them to think about you a certain way. But the first thing I would say is, you know what? The media has been saying a lot of really hurtful things about me. Has any of you have you ever had has have you, any of you ever here had something you said taken out of context and used against you maliciously? No, I noticed I didn't defend myself. I basically have any of you ever had something you said taken out of context and used against you in a very malevolent way, in a very hurtful way? You ever been the victim of that kind of bullying? Now, I didn't defend myself. I just have you ever been in that position? I didn't ask you to think. I didn't tell you to think about it my way. The very way I asked the question caused you to shift internally, and opens a window. It's not going to get me off the hook, but it's going to change how they're thinking about what I'm saying.
To open
Right?
up and to see things from a different perspective, to see things from
Absolutely.
your perspective, to
Yeah.
stand.
Have you ever met somebody that you thought was evil and nasty? You found out they were really, really a good person inside, and they were just taken out of context. Right? Just notice how I don't say you. It's an editorial you, and I'm not saying think of me that way. Because I didn't say think of me that way, they give themselves, that's called the Thorndike effect. The minute I get them involved in a narrative or a story, they associate into that position. If I ask a question that causes them to access a certain experience, they will start to view me through that same filter, and they will put themselves in my position. And that starts to create empathy. Once I have empathy, now I have something to build on. Now, if I'm getting a lot of pushback from the media, I may have a lot more work to do, right?
Let's go to an easier topic regarding influence and persuasion. Let's say, coming back to women in a dating context, how might
Okay.
one use NLP, influence and persuasion skills, in a dating or an attraction context?
What specifically in a dating or attraction context are we working
Okay,
at?
well,
What level, what stage are we at?
well, let's say you go to a bar, you're chatting to someone, you've just met them. What are some
Hmm.
things that you could do to influence or persuade them? I mean, if they're not attracted to you, they might never be. But if it is a winnable battle, what are some
Okay.
things that you might be able to do?
First and foremost, I would absolutely make them laugh. I would find a way to lighten the situation. I would also put any sexual agenda or any romantic agenda out of my mind before approaching, simply because you don't want to go in there with a sexual agenda. You want to go out and find out if their person is cool to hang with. See, most women when they create their dating profiles, they're lying. And I mean that in the nicest sense. They may believe that the things they're writing down are all true. Like, I want somebody who's courteous, kind, loyal, thrifty, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, whatever, must love dogs and red wine. You send them to the Boy Scouts of America page or something like that. But none of that is actually true until they're having fun with you. None of that other stuff matters until they're actually enjoying spending time with you. So that's the first goal. You've got to be fun. You've got to be playful. You've got to have the right state. If you enter a set, whether it's a two set or a single person at a bar, if you enter it with your state being wrong, that's going to poison the frame. You're going to have to work harder to win that. So the first thing is get your state right. If you come in a happy, fun, playful, nice to meet you kind of a vibe without a sexual agenda, you're going to fly under her radar. She's going to throw a few tests at you to see if what you're really about, but that's later down the line. So that's the first thing. The second thing you want to do is you want to create an environment where it's cool to talk in a safe, non-threatening way. We have a process we call the 3 magic questions that works really, really well for that. And it's basically an opinion opener or an opinion question about something in the environment or why they're here. You might say something as simple, let's say you're at a wedding reception and you're seated at a table with some other people. It's like, what do you think of the band? Right? Or what do you think of these flower arrangements? Would you take one of these home, or do you like, you try to ask questions that can't be answered in a yes or no. Now that does one very specific thing. It moves them from a state of internal dissociation to a state of external association. In other words, they're out of their head and in the world paying attention to you. But you're doing it in a non-creepy, non-threatening, non-sexual way that allows for conversation. Now you want to keep that conversation fluffy. You want to keep it light. You want to keep it interesting, and you want to use as much of their words as possible when you're doing it. Because the moment a person gets their words back, they feel an internal ping. Every human being on the planet is sending a little like sonar or radar. They're pinging out into the universe their internal map, their internal checklist of what's desirable, what's right, what they're supposed to have. And every time they get a ping back that matches, their attraction meters go up, their attention meters go up. So you'll get attention first. Because you're using their words, their way, it goes right into the most sensitive parts of their neurology. They feel heard. They feel understood. They get really curious really quick. Curiosity in a woman is a powerful thing. Okay? Now you can start to ask other types of questions. This is what we call the 3 magic questions protocol. It's not 3 questions, it's 3 categories of question. So the first question or level of question is what we call location occasion. They're simple, easy opinion openers that suck them out of their head and into the environment and interacting with you. That gives you the ability to gauge their state, look at their physiology, and echo their words, and then take them to level 2, which is career and passion. You get people talking about things that they're passionate about, that they're interested in. Just about every single human being on the planet, mostly men, but a lot of women nowadays, have an idea for a book or a business. Okay? And when you get them talking about those things or the career that they love, now you're actually interacting with them at an identity level of consciousness. This is a part of them that is very, very close to their heart. It is their heart, in fact. It's the part of them that when you stroke those heartstrings in just the right way, they feel tremendous pleasure. And they will simultaneously give you huge amounts of information about who they are, their model of the world, whether they see themselves as winners or losers, victims or go-getters. And at the same time, they'll become progressively more attracted to you because as you echo their words back, they feel heard. They feel validated. There's no judgment. And don't believe me with this. Just go out and start echoing people's words and watch what they do. They don't shut up. They just keep talking. The longer they talk, the better you look. The longer you talk, the more connected to you they become. Now, I need to make a distinction. Initially, there'll be attraction, then there'll be connection. Whether you keep attraction or not will depend largely on what else you do throughout the 3 magic questions protocol. Most people need to get attraction, then connection and comfort, and then they can go into arousal. But in 3 magic questions protocol, you start with very superficial level questions, things that are non-sexual, non-threatening about who they are why they're there, the venue they're in. I had one of my students came to one of my attraction workshops, learned 3 magic questions, went out that night to a bar, walked up to one of the girls at the bar and said, "Hey, what are the drink specials?" They wound up dating for 3 weeks, right? Probably longer than that, but that's when I lost track of them. Just because he opened them with a non-threatening, non-sexual, not obvious question. He literally, the fact if you want to get past a woman's defenses, you have to disqualify yourself or disqualify her as a potential romantic interest, because every woman you meet, every woman you walk up to is immediately going to paint you with an agenda of, wanting sex, right? So you have to find a way to circumvent that idea. So when you start talking about things that are completely neutral, completely not attraction related, they're like, they don't know what to do with that. But if they're interested in you and your state is right, they'll at least give you the opportunity to interact with them. And that's where it starts. You have to set up an environment where they feel safe enough to interact with you. And now as you go through the 3 Magic Questions protocol, they'll start generating body language phases. There are 7 discrete phases of body languaging that people go through naturally. Now, a lot of the pickup and attraction systems out there, they kind of hack those 7 stages. They try to force them. Most people don't have the social acuity to hack those states, but if you just become aware of them and know what they look like, then you can have a pretty good idea of where you stand in relationship to this person that you're seeking to attract and maybe go further with. And also what to do next. What we call it the mating dance. When women go through this attraction process, where you're going from complete stranger to 1 + 1 = 3, there's 7 discrete body language phases that couples go through, 5 out of 7 of which the woman is leading the dance. The man literally doesn't have to do anything except not disqualify himself and know what to do at these key points. And you can get intimate with a woman in as little as 20 minutes. I wouldn't recommend that, because it takes as long as it takes. But the first one is going to be what they call the pivot stage, or the acknowledgement stage. So when someone approaches, the first thing, let's say they're facing the bar. Person approaches from their left, and the first thing that happens is this. Slight turn. Person acknowledges your entry into their world. That's level 1. That's where you say hi, you've made eye contact. There's a little body language technique that you can use. Are you familiar with the unconscious hello?
No.
Okay. There's a certain behavior that all mammals engage in. It's called the unconscious hello, and it's signified by an eyebrow flash. If you've ever watched a group of guys greeting each other out on the boardwalk or whatever, you'll see them walk up, they'll go, "Hey, how you doing?" Right? You see the little eyebrow flash? When human beings make eye contact, a split second before or after they've made eye contact, there will be a brief eyebrow flash. I've actually darkened my eyebrows so you can see them. Right? That brief eyebrow flash. If you catch that eyebrow flash and you return it within a split second, it signals on a neurological level friend. And they'll fall deeper into rapport quickly. If you don't get the flash, the guards will go up. If you flash the eyebrow and you get this, it's time to back off. They're probably going to knee you in the nards, right? But it's just those 3 positions. So you either get the flash, you either get nothing, or you get the furrowing, which means back off. You've reached the minimum safe distance, right? So as you approach, just that can dramatically open the doorway to rapport. And it's done within the first fraction of a second. It's like a micro expression. It's like a fraction of a second. It's called a key stimulus, really. And if you just master that, you're going to find it's going to be a lot easier for you to get rapport with people. But it happens the moment you make eye contact in a fraction of a second. And as long as you return it, you're going to be golden. Okay. Then you ask your 3 magic questions: location, occasion. You transition into career and passion. And you ask questions like, so I'm curious, what is it you love about what you do? Not just what do you do, but I'm curious, just so I understand you better. What is it you love about what you do? What gets you up in the morning? What made you decide that? I'll bet there's an origin story there. How did you do that? And let them talk.
What if they hate their job and it gives a negative feel to the conversation? They're like, "Oh, I hate my job, blah, blah, blah."
What would you rather be doing?
Okay.
What do you love to do? Right? Don't be afraid. Here's one of the things that is really cool. People who just meet for the first time, they only follow one conversational thread at a time. People who've been together, who know each other for a long time, open and close multiple conversations simultaneously. So don't be afraid to just transition. So what do you really love to do then? What would you rather be doing? Right? And that's because nobody's ever asked them that. And you'll be amazed. And if all you do is nod, listen, echo, repeat, and ask your next question, you're going to be amazed at how long they just keep talking, and they just keep talking, and they just keep talking. And they're going to give you tremendous amounts of information. Now, here, the beautiful part about this, Mike, it's Michael,
yes.
Right? Yeah. Okay. I didn't know if it was Mike or Michael, so I just, one of the things, beautiful parts about this process is it doesn't matter about gender. Gender doesn't matter. It can be male to female, which is the common traditional dynamic. It can be female to female. It can be male to male. Does not matter. The original Three Magic Questions protocol was originally designed for women to use on men. I modified it a little bit so that both genders can make equal use of it. Now I've got personal injury attorneys all over the country using this on juries, during voir dire and stuff like that, to make every juror love them. So no matter who gets selected, they vote for my client's my client's witness or defendant. It's pretty cool, actually. So a lot of the things that we learn in an attraction dynamic are directly transferable into a business or professional dynamic. And we can talk about why that is in terms of the archetypes of it. But you're going to go from the acknowledgement stage to the pivot stage to what we call the reaching stage, which is where a person will actually take something and move it closer to the person. This is one of my students who used to run a wine bar. When I was first teaching this, after I was teaching this, she goes, "You know what? You are absolutely right. I run a wine bar, and I would watch men and women come into the bar at the beginning of the night. At the beginning of the night, they're seated across from each other at the bar. At the end of the night, their wine glasses are right next to each other. Because as people go from stranger to intimacy, two things keep changing: proximity and orientation. So if this is ventral orientation, the front line of your body, this would be what a common attraction dynamic looks like. This is her, this is you, right? Who's more invested in this situation? This person is, because they have more ventral orientation. So on this attraction dynamic, this happens, and then this happens. Right? And so that's the same analogy you'll see. So you'll start with the acknowledgement stage, the pivot stage. The reaching stage is the first time a person will go to move something and they'll subconsciously move themselves or one of their items closer to the person. All you have to do as the person on the other end of that is exactly what they do. If they move their coffee cup closer to you, you move your coffee cup closer to them, the exact same degree. That's mimicry. That's one of the most powerful social influence tools that we have. It's so powerful, in fact, that both law enforcement and military services use it to find terrorists and ringleaders of undercover groups and things like that. And the military does it in a proactive way. Unfortunately, the law enforcement, or fortunately in our case, law enforcement has to do it in a reactive way. But mimicry, that copying one another, is one of the most fundamental aspects of two neurologies becoming one neurology. And that's what we're hardwired to do.
You mentioned a little earlier in regard to using humor when entering a set. Do you go by the rule where you would use humor depending on that person's self-esteem? For example, if they were very high self-esteem, then you might nag them, tease them a little bit. If they were lower self-esteem, then maybe you make fun of yourself or someone else in the room. How would you use humor?
I usually avoid humor that's directed at a particular person I'm interacting with until I know that person a little bit better. So one of the things I will often do, and I do this every time I go to a Starbucks, so it's a good way to practice. I want to find, every now and then I'll just throw out a funny line just to see who's paying attention to me. So like when I'm in line at Starbucks, the most common question I get is, do you want ice in your coffee? Or do you want cream of sugar in your coffee? And I usually say, because if you've ever been to Starbucks, on a slow day, the coffee is so hot it sets off a Geiger counter, right? So I might say something like, "No, just a few ice cubes so I don't spontaneously combust." And there you go, just that little laugh. Now, the first thing that'll happen is 99 times out of 100, the barista laughs. But every now and then I hear chuckles from behind me as well. And that tells me who's paying attention to me. So a lot of times when my first couple of shots across the bow, and I'll give you an exception to this rule in a minute, will be not directed necessarily at a person or a person's self-esteem, but at a situation or an environment, right? I'll reframe something that has been said or done in a funny way that doesn't offend anyone. You have to be careful with negs because only certain types of people respond predictably to negging. The other part is that negs have to be delivered in a cocky, funny way. They have to be delivered in a fun, playful way. And most people are too stressed out when they try to neg, and so they come off as offensive and condescending rather than funny, playful, and cocky.
So for the listeners not familiar, a neg is simply a tease. You're simply teasing someone, right? And it should be in a playful way, but it can come across as...
It's a covert... Yeah. It's a covert attack on somebody's self-esteem. Like, if you walk up to somebody who's got really beautiful ornate nails, well, the vast majority of people's fingernails out there are artificial. You might say something, oh, those are gorgeous nails. Are they real? Right? And now you complimented her, but in the act of admitting that they're not real, it's actually lowered her perceived value, because it actually kind of says, well, you're not really being authentic. You're just, but you're not saying that. That act of just subtly asking that question in a way that lowers the value of what you've just given them creates a difference in perceived value. Remember I talked about status and how human beings are extremely, extremely compliant and suggestible to status. What you're going to find out in the real world is that is status and validation, the ability to perceive as being okay, to be acceptable, to be approved of, is a fundamental driver in most forms of human interaction. Human beings are status-seeking creatures, either in other words, because they get access to more resources, or because people with status can guarantee survival of, improved quality of life. So we are hardwired for that status. And whenever you get into a frame war, there's going to be a status war too. Usually the person who controls the frame has the highest status, right? And because of your position with that status, you can take a lot more liberties than someone of lower status. In fact, no, you can see that in dramatic detail if you ever go to YouTube. There's a video of a guy dressed up like a homeless guy, and as people walk by, he tries to give them $1. And you see these people just go ballistic about this homeless guy trying to give them $1. It's insulting. Now, that's a similar thing that happens when a person of low status tries to compliment a person of higher status. It's perceived as inauthentic, offensive, like there's an agenda to it, right? So one of the things that has to happen is you have to become aware of whatever status gap is there and either balance the status gap or imbalance the status gap. Ideally, for maximum influence, you want to unbalance the status gap. Okay, that's where attraction is generated. If you come in and that's what classic rapport. That's why when you mentioned rapport as the first piece for this, I kind of jump back to state control. If you just use traditional techniques as they're taught in NLP, you will get equal status with a person. That will generate connection. That may generate trust, but it probably won't generate attraction. In order for there to be attraction, there must be a perceived status gap. Then they become attention seeking. That's validation seeking.
You mentioned you were going to give an exception a moment ago. Is there an exception you wanted to throw into the mix?
Yes. If you walk up to somebody and they neg you first, that it's on. Right? Because women do not pay attention to people they don't like. So if they throw an insult or they try to neg you, that's them testing you to see if you'll play back. That's them saying, "Oh, you're interesting. Let's see if you got some cojones." Right? So whenever you get that that shot across the bow, as I like to call it, she's already interested. She's just trying to see if you're man enough, or you will man up or run away. That's when I'll start to play. But you still have to be playful. You still have to control your state. If you get pissed off, offensive, you've lost the frame. Right?
I want to look at maybe in closing public speaking. Right, okay. You're a great presenter. Whether it be within an influence and persuasion context or just public speaking in general, what advice or recommendations, tips or strategies would you advise for the average person to lift their public speaking game? Whether it's overcome nerves or anything.
Love your audience.
Love your audience. Okay.
Love your audience. Care more about your audience getting value than whether you look stupid or not. Believe me, your audience will sense it, and they will bond with you. Right? I screw up all the time on webinars, on stage, but because I'm out, I love my audience. My audience feels that connection. Then those what most presenters would think of as glaring stage mistakes or things that would undermine your credibility become endearing to your audience. It humanizes you to them while at the same time keeping you at an elevated status level. Right? So the fastest hack for everything else I could teach you. The fastest hack is to love your audience. And everything else will take care of itself. As weird as that sounds, you're going to find that the vast majority of things that people rely on techniques for are actually much easier to access if you're just in the right state. That's why it's the first piece of everything we teach. If your state is right, it's hard to get anything wrong.
If you're excited to present the material, you love the message, but maybe you're inexperienced or haven't done any public speaking for several years, so you've got like the nerves going, what might you do to reduce those nerves or to get yourself into a positive state?
Well, first of all, don't try to reduce the nerves. The nerves are there to tell you that something cool is about to happen. That's energy. Your body's generating energy for you to use. Now, take that energy and direct it to your audience. Direct it to your presentation. Don't sit there and try and battle it. Acknowledge that you're excited. Acknowledge that your system is going into what some people might perceive of as fight or flight. The meaning you assign to those symptoms will dramatically change how it expresses itself. I get terrified, technically, every time I go out on stage, right? It doesn't go away. It just becomes a natural part of the process. And when you realize it's a natural part of the process, it's just, you just know to do the next step. But one of the things you can do, and I recommend you do this, is the power poses. Physiology. Superman pose, or Superman pose, Wonder Woman pose, right? Are you familiar with these from Amy Cuddy at all?
No.
Okay. There are certain physiologies that you can attain that will generate a state break. So the first one is what we call the victory pose. So if you've ever seen, even blind kids who've never ever seen another person doing a gesture, when they do something great or they win a game, their hands fly up.
Like the Rocky statue pose.
Yep, exactly. And what researcher Amy Cuddy discovered was that if you held these poses for as little as 2 minutes, reliably and consistently, your psycho-emotional state would change so much so that it would actually show up in your bloodstream. You would actually get up to a 20% bump in your testosterone and a corresponding drop in cortisol. So, even women say, well, I don't want more testosterone. Yes, you do. Testosterone is the achievement hormone. Testosterone is the hormone that makes you more willing to take chances, to be more assertive, to be more aggressive, to say what's on your mind, to withstand confrontation. There's no place where that is not a useful thing. Simultaneously, it drops your cortisol level, which is your stress hormone. So you become more assertive, more dominant, more charismatic, and more relaxed at the same time. So the power posing is a great way to break whatever state you're in, and then go do your thing. When Amy was doing the research on this, and you can pull up her TED Talk. So I guess I make a lot of assumptions when I'm on here because I when people say they're familiar with my work, I use a lot of these same metaphors. So the TED Talk, Amy would have people hold these postures. She would have a control group and she would have a posing group, and she would send these people in randomly through these mock job interviews. And the people running the interviews were specially trained to be the most hard-assed, nitpicky, non-expressive, hard question asking types of interviewers imaginable. And these people were sent in randomly. One group did the power poses, another group did not. Consistently, the groups that did the power poses before going into the interview scored higher on those subjective interviews from those same trained people than the people who did not. I had a client, one of my lawyer clients, I taught this to him. He had a witness that he wanted to put on the stand that was terrified of being deposed. And so he taught him the power poses. And every 10 minutes or 15 minutes before he was about to go on the stand, he would have him do this power pose. But what my client didn't know was that his witness was the coach for a local high school football team who hadn't had a winning season in like the last 3 to 5 years. I don't know exactly how many, it was like 3 or 5, it was a long time. And what he had done is this power pose worked so well for him, he went back to his team and he taught them how to do these power poses. They did them before every game, before every down or whatever it was. Whenever he took a break, they would have him do a 2-minute power pose. They swept the championship that year, right? So your physiology, Your physiology controls your psychology. Remember, Michael, the one thing, if you leave nothing out with nothing else from our podcast today, everything human beings do is in response to a feeling. A feeling they either want more of or a feeling they want a whole lot less of. If all human behavior begins and ends with a feeling, why not start there? Generate the feeling, and your body will automatically assume the right posture. It'll assume the right breathing pattern. The tonality will be right. You could literally say, Mary had a little lamb, and get your outcome. Because everything that the neurology processes before language is consistent, congruent, and activates a corresponding state in the person you're communicating with.
Once you're in the right state, you've done your power poses, you know your material, you're excited to present it. Are there any other kind of advanced public speaking tips that the average person may not know that you would recommend?
There's lots of them. Lots of them. What level of public speaking are we talking about? I mean, are we talking about rank beginners? Or are we talking about, there's so many things that can go into that. I mean, I don't know where to begin. We need to kind of narrow it down specifically.
Sure.
Give me a more specific context.
Well, let's say that you were in some kind of sales context and you were doing your first seminars, right? Like say personal development, for example. How would you then go about moving, influencing, persuading an audience, either relatively familiar with your work or those unfamiliar?
First thing you want to do is get their attention. You get their attention by talking about the things that are most important to them. If you're speaking on a specific topic, there are certain generalizations that you can make. And so the first thing, my particular approach to presenting in public speaking is to be as interactive as humanly possible, as early on as possible. So I'm going to ask, how many people here like to do cool stuff? How many people here like to meet cool people? How many people like to do cool things with people who like to do cool stuff? Right? Raise your hands, right? And I'll get them raising their hands, right? So I've got them doing things together. That changes them from an individual mind to a group mind, which is going to happen anyway. But the faster I can facilitate one group connecting with me, I change that group of individuals into one person, and then I connect with that one person. But I get them all doing the same things. It's going to happen anyway. But I do it in a way that they establishes commonality. I might say, how many people here have something they want more of? How many people here have something they'd like to get rid of? Right? Get their hands going. Get them acknowledging it. A lot of times if I have, and this is for smaller groups, you can't do this with larger groups, but for smaller groups, a lot of times before the start of the event actually starts, I'll actually sit in front of the room and I'll say, what do you want to learn tonight? And I'll ask them, and I'll repeat it back and I'll echo it. What do you want to learn tonight? What do you want to learn? And I'll write them on the board. Just that level of human interaction lets you target your even though it's a set presentation, it lets you start to customize it. You get a feel for that audience. And when you connect with an audience that way, there's an intimacy that's developed. That's very compelling. Now you have to be careful with that aspect because it can get away from you really quick, especially if there's a big group. But one of the things I want to do up front is I want to get them. I want to position. There's 5 positioning statements we want to position ourselves, who I am. We want to position the audience. This talk is for you if you've ever wanted to get more dates. You've ever been passed over for a job interview that you thought you were a shoo-in for. The love of your life ran off with your best friend. Whatever it is, right? But you want to globalize it. You don't want to get so specific that it can disqualify people. You want to get general enough that the vast majority of people in your audience can relate and plug their own experience into what you're saying. At least 3 of those, right? That causes people to say, oh, he understands. They fill in all their own details and assume you know them too. That's the best part. These are what we call hollow words or empty words. Not that they're empty in terms of meaning, but in that they're like clear glass vessels that take on the color of whatever fluid you put them in. A person will fill in the meaning, their own meaning to those words, and act like you knew it all along. So we want to start with by entering their world, positioning their talk. We talk about who we are. We need to create connection and vulnerability. We do that by talking about something personal, a personal experience that is similar to theirs, analogous to theirs, that led me to be there and why I'm qualified, besides the curriculum vitae that I may have read or not read yet. why I'm qualified to stand up in front of you. I had this problem and this is what I did. And we're gonna learn today. Today we're gonna talk about X and Y and Z, and then I'm gonna show you how to take it further. You want to make sure that you always put what we call a transition bullet, a transition statement into your overview of the night, because as we do this, as we go through these pieces, they're going to tick off those check marks. And when it says how to take it further, how to go from interesting information to lasting transformation, you can seamlessly transition into your offer. Where most people lose credibility or they lose the profit from their events is not during the event. It's actually at the end of the event when they're transitioning from giving content and delivering the value they've promised to asking people to take the next step. Then they go into salesperson mode. If you have if you have a PowerPoint that has all the things you've covered and the transition bullet, how to take it, and it says something sales, what to do next, and you just read it, it transitions you right into your offer. Notice I didn't say close, I said offer. In the world according to David, we don't sell people stuff. We find out what it is they want to buy, and we offer them an opportunity to take it. We're not really concerned too much about whether they buy or whether they don't. All we care about is that they make a decision one way or the other. And so everything that we teach is about getting people to the decision point. There are people who will buy everything you have because you told them to buy it. There are people who will have to test drive every YouTube video 27 times, and 3 years later, they'll buy. But as long as you're giving value and giving people things that change their life, that give them an experience. And that's, Michael, that's really what it's about. You have to give people the experience. You can't just talk about it. You got to get them up. You got to get them doing things, interacting. Now, there's trainers out there who say, don't give a demo, don't take questions. Well, fuck them, all right? Because that's what I do. And it does piss some people off, but it also makes our lectures and our approaches much more intimate. And I think that's something that people are missing. We have, because of social media, because of YouTube, because of all these different forms of virtual connection, we have an illusion of intimacy, but we don't really have true intimacy. And that's something that only interacting with somebody can do. You can watch my videos all day long, and people feel like they've known me for years. And they come up to me at a convention or something, and they say hi to me, hey, like they're greeting an old friend. And I look at them like, hi. And I got that blank. You've seen speakers like this, like, hi, right? Because of that effect. And I try to get to know them very, very quickly because usually I don't have a lot of time, but I want them to feel the love that I have for them. Even though I've never met them before, I have deep feelings for all of my students. It's a holdover or a crossover from my martial arts training, where when I came up through the martial arts, your dojo was your family, and it was, all for one and one for all. I look at every one of my students, regardless of what level you're at or whether you've ever bought a product or not, as part of that family. And I try to convey that as much as I can. And I think if you come from that place, regardless of your level of technical ability in terms of public speaking, if you come from that place first, you will connect with your audience, and they will be transported by whatever words you speak. Because if you come from that place, it's very, very difficult to say the wrong thing. Okay? So you always want to position yourself, you want to position the audience, you want to position your talk, you want to position your offer. And one of the best ways to do that I learned from Lisa Sasevich is simply, if this is the scope of everything we could talk about today, we have time for about this. So if it's okay with you, my commitment to you tonight is I will take you as far as I can in the time that we have. I will teach you as much as humanly possible. And I will show you where to go for more if that's what you want to do. Would that be okay? Well, the minute they say yes, you've just been given permission to make your offer at the end of the training. Right? And you'll see the vast majority of people go, okay. Right? And that's it. So start with your state. Then it goes to technique. Get the people connected with you. Find those affinity points. Find those moments of sameness. Step into their world. Talk about those experiences. Tell them about your version of their experience and what you did to change it and how you're going to help them get there too. And be as interactive as humanly possible. Get them doing things, affirming. How many people have ever had this? How many people have ever this? Crack a joke every now and then, right? A lot of the things, if you watch a lot of the openings of my videos, it's the same formula. I said, how many people here have ever been little children? Right? Makes you laugh, right? But they all raise, some people don't actually raise their hand, but a lot of people do, right? That does a bunch of things simultaneously. The most powerful memories you ever had, the ones that created the person you are today, happened when you were a child. The first thing I ask, how many people have ever been little children? They fly back to when they were little children. I've just accessed their deepest memories. How many people here ever played pretend? Right? And then I go into this whole dialogue about playing pretend and doing. I'm priming them, but I'm opening them up in a fun, playful way, because you got to get them playful. If you just try to educate without entertaining, you remember, the fastest way to understand the mix is who makes more money, entertainers or educators. All right? You have to have a mix. You can be lighter on the education if you're entertaining. If you're too heavy on education, people will get overwhelmed. So if you don't have the gift of gab, or the outrageousness that some of us have, then your education must be punctuated by breakouts, by drills, things that break up and get them interacting. Otherwise, they go into a boredom trance, unless you're a really dynamic presenter. Right? So again, there's different ways, and again, at context. If I'm just doing a service delivery where I'm teaching things, then it's going to be a lot of drills, a lot of breakouts, things like that. If I'm in what we call a signature talk, where I'm presenting good information but there's an offer connected to it, then I'm going to elicit interaction, not so much through drills, but through raise your hands. How many have ever done this? How many have ever done that? Those kinds of things. But it's all coming from a place of loving them and wanting to be connected to them and understand them and giving them what they came for.
This has been a damn masterclass, David. I've loved it. I've loved it, my friend.
Thank you.
If someone wants to do further training with you, find out more about you, what should they do? First of all, what is your website? But if someone is completely unfamiliar apart from this podcast with you, what first step would you recommend they take?
Well, first thing is, you can always check out our YouTube channel, David Snyder NLP, at youtube.com. Hundreds and hundreds of free videos, not just 15-minute videos. Our average video is about 90 minutes, and people binge watch those things. Tremendous amount of useful information that you can put into practice. You don't have to believe anything I teach. Just go to the video. It's free. Do the drill. Test it out in the real world, and when you're ready, come back for more. That's where I recommend most people to start. If people want to just jump in and take it, one-on-one with me, that's the fastest way to learn. I recommend you go to our website, nlppower.com. We have an events page there. It's nlppower/events. We'll take you to the events calendar, and you'll see what we have planned out for 2019. We also have a pretty well-stocked virtual store, which has everything from 2-hour videos for $47.97 all the way up to 3 and 4 and 5 and 7 day master classes that average around $997 to $1,497. So everything is there. And we have a very, very good customer service staff. So if you have any questions at all, you can email Nikki or Stephanie through the support window. And usually if it's something that they can't answer, they'll forward it right to me, and you'll get an answer directly from me. So that's probably the best way to get a hold of it. For those of you, a lot of people want to work, I have a clinic here in Solana Beach where we specialize in dealing with physiological illness that has as its roots repressed emotion. If you want that kind of work, then you need to call the clinic directly. And the number for that is 858-481-1438. We're going to give everybody who was on the podcast tonight a free 30-minute consultation. Usually to walk into the room with me, it's $275. We're going to sit down. We're going to discuss your cat. We're going to actually screen you to make sure that your case is a fit for our methods. Once you pass our screening, we'll discuss strategies and tactics for getting your situation resolved in the shortest amount of time possible. If we can help you, we'll tell you. If we can't help you, we'll tell you that too. And we'll recommend other resources that you might try that might be a better fit. So for those of you who are interested in that level of work, we do offer it. And the clinic number is 858-481-1438.
David Snyder, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Michael.
That was beautiful, brother. We went deep.
Thank
That
you.
was like